The Salem witch trials occurred in colonial Massachusetts between 1692 and 1693. More than 200 men and women were accused of some sort of involvement in witchcraft. Of the 200, 20 were hanged. Colonists in Salem Village were expected to be Puritan. That meant no dancing, no singing, and dressing modestly and plainly, and regularly reading the Bible and no other books. In January of 1692, Reverend Parris's daughter, Elizabeth, and his niece, Abigail Williams, started having fits. They screamed, they threw things, uttered peculiar sounds, and contorted themselves into strange positions. Dr. William Briggs was brought in to figure out what it was that ailed these girls. He could find no physical cause for the girls' problems and diagnosed them of being afflicted by the evil hand. Word spread of this news around the village like wildfire, and more girls were diagnosed of bewitchment. On February 29th, under pressure from magistrates Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne, the girls began the accusations that led to the witch trials. Tituba, Reverend Parris's Caribbean slave, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly, impoverished woman, were the first 3 accused of being witches. The women were brought before the local magistrates and questioned for many days. Osborne and Good claimed innocence, and for a while, Tituba claimed to be innocent as well. But when she could no longer take the interrogation and the beatings, she confessed to signing the devil's book. She added that when she was signing the book, she saw other men and women with the devil, all with the plan of destroying the Puritans of Salem Village. After this, a wave of hysteria hit Massachusetts. Hundreds of men and women were accused of signing the devil's book. Among them was Martha Corey, a loyal and respected woman of the church. In some accounts, she is even referred to as the town matriarch. When her accusation was brought forward, it raised the stake. The belief floating around Salem was if she could be a witch, then anyone could. The questioning of the accused witches became more serious in April when Deputy Governor Thomas Danforth and his assistants attended the hearings. On May 27, 1692, Governor William Phipps ordered the establishment of a special court to hold the trials of the 200 or so accused. Any witch brought before the court that did not confess to witchcraft would be hanged. If they did confess, they must repent their sins, and then they would go through rehabilitation. The evidence brought before the court during the trials was mostly spectral evidence. In other words, dreams and visions. In addition to spectral evidence, the accused were physically examined to look for the so-called witch's teat. This refers to any mole or unusual skin blemish which may allow the devil to enter the body. The test was that this teat would be pricked with a needle, and if the recipient didn't bleed or feel it, then surely they were a witch. However, it is said that the needles were made blunt purposefully so it would be easier to demonstrate how cold and unfeeling that witch was. The next most common test was the Lord's Prayer test. The accused was asked to recite the Lord's Prayer without error, not even stammering or stumbling. If any mistake was made, that person was surely a witch.
Mid-September 1692, the use of spectral evidence was finally declared inadmissible in court, thus marking the beginning of the end of the trials. With spectral evidence being inadmissible, it became impossible to prove a person's involvement in witchcraft. On September 22nd, 8 people were hanged. These were the last hangings of the Salem witch trials. Following the trials and hangings, many involved, like Judge Samuel Sewall, publicly confessed to error and guilt, and in 1702, the court declared the trials unlawful. In 1711, the court passed a bill that restored the good name of those hanged, as well as granted restitution to their heirs. Finally, in 1957, 250 years later, Massachusetts formally and publicly apologized for the events of 1692 and 1693. On December 7th, Governor Stoughton issued a proclamation in hopes of making amends with God. The proclamation ordered a day of prayer and fasting so that all God's people can rid themselves of the jealousy that stirred in the province. The Day of Prayer and Fasting was held on January 15, 1697, 4 years after the last hangings of the trials. On that day, Judge Samuel Sewall attended prayer services and asked the Reverend to read his public apology. The apology outlined Sewall's guilt and desire to take the blame and shame of the events. Then, in 1706, 8 years after the last hangings, Ann Putnam Jr., one of the girls who was allegedly afflicted by Satan, also issued a public apology in which she outlined her sentiment in accusing her neighbor Rebecca Nurse of witchcraft. The Salem witch trials compromised the lives of tens of people, but luckily they led to one of the most important standards in today's American legal system: innocence until proven guilty. This standard revolutionized the way legal proceedings occurred today.